Today I want to talk about necromancy in Mormonism. So let's start by defining what necromancy is. I view it as a method of divination, communication with the dead. The word necro in Greek means black or dark. Mancy is divination or arts. So it is the art of communicating with the dead. I've heard it defined differently by apologetists for the Mormon Church because it's a valid question. Is there necromancy in Mormonism? Mormons are obsessed with dead people. Temples are built for dead people. So I view it as a valid question. So the apologists define it as necromancy is the conjuration of spirits of the dead for purposes of magically revealing the future or influencing the course of events. So by that definition, when you define it as more than just communing with the dead, saying you want to conjure the dead and reveal the future or foresee or change a course of events, then yeah, I would say no. If you're going to define it like that. There really isn't necromancy in the Mormon Church. But if you define it as communing with the dead, then the answer changes. And I would say yes, Mormons do believe in that, that they can commune with their dead ancestors or other dead people, angels, demons. I mean, all of that is rich in the Mormon Church. We have our foundation of the church built on seeing visions of dead people. The first vision, God the Father, Jesus Christ, resurrected, perfected people. That's what they want you to believe that Joseph Smith saw. But there's at least 9 different versions of the first vision. And I found it very interesting that Jeffrey Holland, in his talk in conference this April, when he was testifying about Joseph Smith and the first vision, he didn't specify Joseph saw God the Father and Jesus Christ. He said Joseph saw what he saw and did what he did without being specific. And I think that was a huge red flag or a huge sign that they are trying to move away from this foundational story that isn't always God the Father and Jesus Christ. Sometimes it's Nephi, sometimes it's Moroni, sometimes it's just an angel, unnamed, because there are so many different versions of that vision, and they were written out years after it took place. So is it hard to imagine Joseph Smith was talking to a demonic entity? It really isn't, when you start to understand how it's just changed and evolved as the church has needed it to change and evolve. So yeah, angels, demons, dead people, magic. The church is founded on all of that. And speaking of magic, I just happened to get a copy of Joseph Smith's Jupiter talisman that he had on his body when he died. Not the very one, of course, but a copy of the talisman that Joseph valued more than his holy garments. This was on his body when he died, not the garments of the holy priesthood. That's another video. But magic and the occult is what built the Mormon Church. It is what the temples were for. Dead people more than living And that is why they have to have them all over the place, because they want the Mormons to come back and come back and come back. You do it once for yourself, but you go through again and again and again for dead people. So that is the foundation of the Mormon Church. They are trying to break away from this image, but they are never going to be like mainstream Christianity if they continue to hold on to temple work. Temple work is mostly for the dead, and it is going to be very hard for the church to come into mainstream Christianity clinging on to this idea of having to do baptisms and temple work for the dead. So if you ask me, can Mormons communicate with the dead? I say, yes, they can, and yes, they do. And they're obsessed with it, right, because of temple work. And many Mormons have stories of ancestors coming to them in dreams or visions saying, do my temple work, find this name. I mean, that is a very common thing to have born in testimony meeting, a service in church once a month where people get to just come to the pulpit and bear their testimony, tell you how they know church is true, the Mormon church is true. And a lot of them will tell stories about seeing dead relatives or having visions or inspiration that they need to find someone in their ancestry to do this temple work for. So I grew up with very, very fanatical Mormon parents who also came from pretty fundamental Mormon parents who came from really fundamental Mormon parents. Both sides were there at the beginning of the church. Both sides have great-grandfathers who were polygamists. My mother's side, her father's father was in Joseph Smith's inner circle in Nauvoo and practiced polygamy and came with Brigham Young West after the prophet Joseph Smith died. So this legacy, my family, goes way back for generations to the beginning of the church. And I remember having stories told of the pioneers coming and our ancestors who crossed the plains and sacrificed everything, told to me from the time I was, tiny, all the way. It was something my family was very proud of. They were proud that we came from polygamist stock and, the inner circle of Joseph Smith. But there is a story I want to share from my family's history about seeing dead people. It's a dead ancestor story. So this is about my great-grandfather and his son, which is my grandfather, my father's father. And so my great-grandfather was about 37 years old. He was married, had 3 sons, and he was called on a mission for the church. And it was still common practice that first 100 years of the church, they could just pluck the father out of the home and send him on a mission. And that's what they did to my great-grandfather. So he was called to serve a mission in Switzerland and Germany, over in Europe, and he was called away for 3 years. So my grandfather was 10 years old when his dad was called on this mission. And at the end of his mission, he was making his way home. He got really sick and was in a hospital in, I think it was Zurich, Switzerland. Anyways, he knew he was not going to make it home. He knew he was going to die. And, there's this miracle story about how the body came home and they were able to bury him. And so then his 3 sons, who had already at this point been running the farm and taking care of the family for the last 3 years that he was gone on his mission. Basically, when he left them in 1905, that was it. they never saw him alive again, and he died in 1908. So around 1917, just before World War I, their oldest son, his name was Will, and my grandfather's name was Reuben. So Will and Reuben, the oldest two, were working the farm together, and Will had been called to serve a mission, but he had not left yet. So they're working the family farm, and the story goes that they had taken a break for lunch, and they were sitting under the hay wagons because that was where the shade was, and it was in the springtime. And they were having a conversation, and then all of a sudden Reuben stopped talking to Will, and he started talking to somebody else. And he's having this conversation, so Will just sits back and is observing. He thought there was somebody out of his vision and that Reuben was talking to an actual person there. So he just waited for Reuben to stop talking, and then he asked him, "Who are you talking to?" And Reuben's response was, "I was talking to our dad. Couldn't you see him? Couldn't you hear him? He was right there." And Will, being the oldest boy, kind of thought that was unfair, that their dead dad, appeared to the younger boy, and not him. So there was a little bit of jealousy brewing over that experience. And Reuben would not share the details of what their father said. Will could hear the conversation. He could hear the responses of his brother, but he didn't know what his dad had said, and that really bothered him. My grandfather and my father both talked about this experience. It was so profound, and it was not the only time that his dead dad came back and talked to my grandpa. He did it a few more times in the following years, and then my grandfather got really sick in 1918 with the pandemic that started back then. It was November, and he was basically on death's door. And his father appeared to him again and said, "You have a choice. You can come with me to the other side, or if you choose to stay," he told my grandfather, "you're going to have a very hard life. You're going to be sick all the time." He was basically trying to tell him that, it's going to be better for you over here, so you should just cross over. But if you choose to stay, he was engaged to my grandma at the time. He said, "If you choose to stay, I'm not coming back. You'll never, see me again. We won't interact again. And you're going to have just a very hard life. You're going to be sick a lot." So my grandpa said, "Well, I want to stay. I'm going to stay. I'm going to marry, my soon-to-be wife, and that's my decision." And he said the look on his father's face was of great disappointment and sorrow. And then he never saw him again. And he did live his life, and he was pretty sick. And I would say, okay, self-fulfilling prophecy there probably had a little bit to do with it. But, and then every time my grandfather got sick, he thought he was going to die because of what his dead father had told him. And I remember my dad, he was the oldest son. And he was actually named after his grandfather who had died on his mission. They had the same name. And every time Grandpa got sick, it was up to my dad to run over there and, assure him he would be fine. And it was kind of like a ghostly omen that this dead relative, laid down on my grandfather. It wasn't, I don't know, but the story doesn't end there. Back to 1918, my great uncle Will is on his mission, and he's still jealous over Reuben having this experience with their dead dad. So he's praying and praying on his mission. And missions, you're extra close to God. right? Missionaries have a special extra protection and connection to God, to Jesus, to the Holy Spirit. So he's thinking he can pray and see his dead father because he wants to know what he told his brother, and he just wants to have this experience of seeing someone on the other side. So it's unsuccessful. He's not seeing his father, and one night he prays and says, okay, well, I'll take anybody. Okay, big mistake. You don't say that. But according to our legend, our story, he says, I'll see anybody. Just show me somebody from the other side. And then he hears a voice. And Will looks up and he sees a man kind of standing, floating in his room. But he's not dressed in white, which Mormons think dead people are dressed in white. So this man was not dressed in white, and he spoke to him. But Will said he felt like this person was not angelic. And the feeling that he got from him was that he was the devil himself. Lucifer, the fallen angel, Satan, however you want to say it. And this is a bedtime story I would get as a child. Be careful what you pray for. Be careful what you ask for. Because you might get the devil instead of an angel. So he quickly shut down the conversation. I don't know. My parents were never would never explain how he got rid of the devil in his room while he's on his mission. Like there are so many things wrong with that picture. But yeah, that was our history, that my great uncle Will saw the devil on his mission. And he prayed for something he shouldn't have prayed for. That was the big message they were trying to instill in us by telling these scary stories, that he was asking for something that he should not be asking for. And so he got something really nasty in return. The devil appeared to him. So these were my bedtime stories. People coming back from the dead like it was no big deal. And I grew up believing that speaking to the dead was normal, that our ancestors were all around us. My father would say, if our eyes were open, and he's talking about your spiritual eyes, your third eyes, like what the three witnesses of the Book of Mormon, how they saw the gold plates, they used their spiritual eyes. So if our spiritual eyes were open, we could see all the dead people that are all around us all the time. And that's what my parents believed. That's what was taught to them in the Mormon church. Our ancestors are on the other side. They can guide us. They can help us. They can protect us. They can reach out to us. They can warn us. This really isn't a Christian idea. This is a pagan idea, that the dead people are all around us. Another thing that Mormons just don't match up with mainstream Christian beliefs. Because according to Mormonism, the dead can commune with us. Angels, demons, ancestors, they're all out there and they're all available, which is why they wear their special garments to protect them, because it's not just physical things, it's the spiritual attacks, Satan attacks, and his minions that are working against us. All of that is very, very real to Mormons. So the temple, let's talk about that for a second. It is the closest place on earth. It is literally God's house. Jesus and God and Moses and Elijah and all the dead prophets, they can come to the temple. And the very, very first temple ever constructed was in the Kirkland, Ohio, the Kirkland Temple. It was dedicated on March 27th, 1836. So 6 years after the church had been organized and created, they built their first temple. Now, it was not white. It was like a bluish gray with, they say, a red roof and green doors. So it's nothing like what a modern temple would look like. And it was also a meeting house. So anybody could come to that temple and gather. So the first they dedicate the temple, and on Easter Sunday, April 3rd, 1836, they have this, which was, according to the church's website, it coincided with the Jewish Passover. So Joseph Smith and Oliver Cowdery are in the temple, and they experience this manifestation. They say that the Lord himself came to the temple. We take that to mean Jesus. Mormons take it to mean that Jesus came and accepted the temple literally, and expressed that, they were doing everything right. Kirtland, this time in church history, is a big old fuck up. Like, it is all going to go really bad really quickly. But yeah, Jesus came and gave his blessing on the temple. And then so did Moses. So did Elias and Elijah. And these men came to restore the keys, which is what had to happen so that they would have authority to gather the tribes of Israel and have sealing powers on earth. That's what they say. But to me, honestly, I think there was too much wine, communal wine, and probably some shrooms being done. If you read anything about the Kirtland Temple and the accounts of people speaking in tongues, and it sounds very much like everybody was high at that point in history. And Joseph Smith at that point in time, absolutely. I think the plant medicine and alcohol were not off limits in his magical world view. So it makes perfect sense that spirits were coming and going from the temple, giving them blessings and filling their presence there. So one important thing about the temple is your worthiness. That is pounded into your head, how you have to be worthy to go into the temple. And nowadays, they even, because these are the house of God, they are the house of Jesus, they can say, if you are worthy enough and if you are quiet enough and still enough, you can feel their presence when you go to the temple. That is something they will tell you even today, that, you can hear whispers in your ear. You can get inspiration from the other side if you go to the temple. And so this is the mentality I was raised with. Talking to the dead, no big deal. They're all around us all the time. And I get that is not probably a normal Mormon experience, right? Not the average Mormon is going to be spoon-fed stories of their dead ancestors, but I was, and that was my world. And there was this idea that both good and evil spirits are around us all the time. So I have had the privilege of being with 3 people when they crossed over: my grandmother, my mother, and my father. So 3 very, very important people in my life. I've got to witness their transition out of this birth, or the birth into the spirit realm. That's what death is to me. It's just a birth into another realm. My grandmother was the most important person in my life, and she was the first person that I got to witness making this transition. I'm going to show a picture of her and me. This is the summer before she died, the summer before she passed. And I was 16 years old, turning 17 in that picture. She was my magical fairy tale grandma. Without her, I would not have survived my childhood. She was Jack Mormon. She raised her children in the church, but she was not fanatical in any way. She was probably the only one in my world that wasn't, in my everyday world, that wasn't a crazy fanatical Mormon. And she was magical. She she was my savior. And the last 6 weeks of her life, just before she passed, she came to live with us. She had an injury. She had to have surgery, and she was recovering in our home. And so I had the privilege of being with her every day the last 6 weeks of her life. So she passed away on December 21st, 1985, and I was with her when she passed, but back up a few days before that, she told me that, and it was just one of those moments, we're sitting there together talking. It was kind of out of the blue. She said that she would be with me, that she would come to me, and that we would see each other again. And it would be at a time in my life when I needed her the most. And then we just went on talking. We really she didn't explain it. And I just took it as her kind of, rambling a little bit. But it stuck with me that I would see her again. And, I'm in this magical worldview. I'm a 16-year-old Mormon girl, and I believe in the temple. I believe we can see dead people. Okay, you're right. I'll see you again. And in my 16-year-old mind, I'm kind of thinking, well, probably in the temple, right? Someday I'll commune with her in the temple, because that's where the veil is the thinnest, and that's probably just the most likely scenario. I'll see my grandma again in the temple. That was 1985. Well, my husband and I didn't get married in the temple. We didn't start our marriage out the right way as a Mormon. Eventually we did. So in 1991, we go through the temple. We were married in 88. So 3 years later, we go through the temple. I'm a card-carrying Mormon for 20 years. Come 2011, I leave the church. Never had my experience with my grandma in the temple. And that is just something that sat in the back of my mind. Like, she told me I would see her again, and that she would come to me in a moment in time when I needed her the most. That's all I had to hang on to. And I kind of thought, like, well, I blew that, because I'm not Mormon anymore. I'm not going to have access to the temple anymore. I just assumed that was not going to happen. Fast forward to 2012, I'm pregnant again with our last child, an unexpected pregnancy, and this is January 2012, sorry. 1 year had passed since I had left the Mormon church, and I'm super pregnant. At this point, both my parents are still alive, and we went to their house for New Year's to celebrate the new year, 2012. And it was hell. It was so bad. My parents, every time they saw me, it was a moment to try to bring me back into the church, or to guilt and shame me for leaving the church. It was just not a good experience to be around my parents. And I'm pregnant. And I'm like, 43 at this point. So not only am I pregnant, I'm heading into, perimenopause. Emotions are everywhere. It was just like a perfect storm. And I was so upset when we came home, and so grateful to be away from my parents. And I can remember this so clearly. I'm finally back home. I'm in my kitchen. I'm making dinner. It's chilly. This moment is just frozen in my mind. And my husband and one of my sons was in the kitchen with me, and they were chatting something about the church. I don't even remember what that was, but I said something that was inappropriate about Joseph Smith. They were talking about, it fit into their conversation. It was kind of a shady joke or a dig at Joseph Smith, and they both just bit my head right off. they just jumped right on me, because you don't joke about the prophet, any of the prophets. It doesn't matter how long he's been dead or any of the stupid shit they did. The prophets are just kind of off limits. And so I said it. I said what I said, and they just ripped me a new one. So I just got home from being ripped and torn into by my parents. My family's turning on me, and it was just like I waited for everyone to leave the room, and I just bawled. It was at that moment where I'm crying over, our family's dinner, sobbing, because I didn't mean to offend them. It was just a joke, and we joke and tease in our family all the time. So I was just doing what we always do, and but apparently at that moment, neither one of them could take a joke about it, and I got the brunt of their anger. And it was just too much. It was like the final straw, and I just cracked in sorrow. I was in so much pain and sadness. I was so fucking alone in my journey out of the church. It was one of those pivotal, key moments of where, the church tells you you're going to lose everything if you leave. And I'm like feeling like, holy fuck. Yeah, I've lost everything. My family hates me, and I'm fucking alone. Like, I had no one that I could talk to, no one that I could turn to. It was just probably the most painful moment that I experienced after leaving the church. That moment in time of being pregnant, feeling betrayed by parents, my husband, my children. Like, nobody understood what I was going through, and I had lost all my friends at that point. Like, I didn't have a person that I could call a friend, a true friend, left. They were all gone. So yeah, it was my total breaking point where I kind of considered, should I come back? Because is this worth it? And then my sadness switched to anger, because the answer was no. I was not going to come back. It would not be worth it to come back. And then, so it wasn't just the sadness. I just had this anger building up within me that was, I didn't know what to do with. I was just so mad. I'd given this church everything, and the people who I loved the most were still stuck in that mindset, and judging me about my life. So in that moment, when I had that little bit of aha and my pain switched to anger, that is when I remembered my grandmother's statement to me, that she would come in a moment when I needed her the most. And I remember crying and praying over that little bowl of chili that I was cooking for our family, and asking her to come to me, and that I needed her with every fiber of my being in that instant. Like, reminding her, she said that to me, and that I was at that point in my life where I felt like I had absolutely nobody. And so I just poured out my heart to her. I prayed to my grandmother like I was praying to God, like I would have prayed to Jesus or anyone, but my prayers were directed to my grandmother. And I said that I had waited patiently, and I sincerely needed her in that moment. There was not another person in this world that could help me the way that I know being with my grandmother, my savior of my childhood, would help me. So this quote from Robin Williams sums up exactly how I was feeling at that moment in time. Robin said, "I used to think the worst thing in life is to end up all alone. It's not. The worst thing in life is to end up with people who make you feel all alone." And that is exactly how I felt. Utterly, completely alone. Like I had lost everything and everyone in my life. So my grandma was in my thoughts every day after that time in the kitchen. And it was about 2 weeks later. It was some time from the time that I prayed and poured my heart out to her before I had the experience with her. So I had gotten up with my third child for him to go to school. And it was about 6:30 in the morning, and he had gotten out the door to get the bus, and I had about a half an hour before I had to get the next child up. So I'm still pregnant, lay down on the couch to just take a little rest. And in that moment is when I had this amazing experience with my grandma. And there was no background. It was just me. And I saw this person walking towards me. And I didn't recognize who it was at first. I just knew that she knew me. There was a recognition and that she was coming straight at me. And so I'm curious and I'm looking, and then the recognition comes that it's my grandmother. And I just start crying. I'm like, just so amazed. She was so beautiful and exactly as I remembered her, just like she was in her picture. She wasn't she was not a young version of herself. She was just like this when she appeared to me, but she was beautiful. The only difference is her hair was pitch black. I have another picture of my grandma. So that's her in the middle. She used to have pitch black hair. That's what she looked like when she came towards me. She had that pitch black hair, but she was still the grandma that I knew, that was my savior, that loved me and helped me survive my childhood. So she comes, we embrace, and I'm crying. And she held me in her arms, and I could feel my heart just thumping out of its chest. It was a very, very physical vision. I would call it a vision or a dream, but it was real. And she had her arms around me, and I had my arms around her. And as soon as I felt like I could peel myself away from her to speak, the first thing I said to her, I looked into her eyes and I said, "I'm so sorry." I said, "I'm not a Mormon anymore." That was my first thought. Here's my dead grandma in my physical space, and I'm hugging her. And my first thought is, "Oh, I'm sorry, I'm not Mormon anymore." And it really was because I didn't want to disappoint her in any way, shape, or form. And I'd been so indoctrinated into this mindset that, she must be Mormon on the other side. I wanted to put that right out in front. And looking into her eyes, it was crystal clear that what my beliefs were did not matter to her. She had tears in her eyes, and I have them streaming down my face. And the only thing that was just flowing and overwhelming me was her love and the emotions of love. And then she spoke to me and told me how much she loved me and how proud she was of me and how she had been with me by my side for so many of the hard times, and how she had watched over me. And it was just this amazing experience that I expected to have in the temple. I really believed, as a true believing Mormon, at some point I would see my grandma in the temple. And that never happened. And then I left the church, and then I thought, okay, well, I fucking blew it. That's never going to happen. And then in the moment when it was not on my radar at all, she came to me and answered my prayer to her to come be with me. And I'm of course not going to share everything from that experience, but we laughed, we cried, we hugged, we talked, and time stood still for me. I don't know how long that was, but I know I woke up on time to get my next child out the door. And when I woke up, I could still feel her around me. I could feel the love. I could feel, the tears were very real. My face was sopping wet. But the biggest takeaway was that she came. She told me she would come, right before she died. And it was like 27 years later before that prophecy was fulfilled. But it was her biggest truth that was conveyed between the two of us was that we are not alone. Our loved ones on the other side do care, do see, do protect, do guide, do inspire, but they don't judge. There was no ounce of disappointment like I was expecting in that first moment. Like, she meant so much to me. I did not want to disappoint her, and I didn't. So woke up with tears streaming down my face, and knew in that moment and ever since that we are not alone. So Mormon or not, she came to me at the perfect time, like she said she would. And she gave me something priceless. She was my first experience with death. And she was my first experience with the spirit on the other side coming through. That happened in 2012. In 2013, I had left Christianity all the way and stepped onto my shamanic path. I was just barely starting to understand what it meant to connect to the earth, to plants, to animals, to commune with spirits in a way that was not judgmental and Mormon. So it was October of 2013. I started doing energy work, started learning how to work with the chakras in my hands, chakras in my body. And I had my first experience of channeling a message. And it was my grandma who came to me first. And I got to experience that gift of automatic writing, could call it that. It was a channeling, and that has happened a few times since then. It's not something I don't seek out dead people to get messages, but when I get a nudge from the other side and inspiration to write, I do it. So my grandmother was the first. Then I channeled my son's friend who had committed suicide when they were, I think, sophomores. That was a very devastating event to my son. And after my channeling with my grandmother, it was all new, and I just asked, is there anyone else that has something to say? And my son's friend almost immediately came through. And so I wrote a letter from his deceased friend to my son. And then that same weekend, it was like I had opened this channel and I kind of wanted to play play in it. And then the next person that came through was my father-in-law, and he had a message for my other son who's named after him. So in a weekend, I had channeled 3 letters from deceased loved ones and a friend. Then the next year, my mother passed away, and I will do a separate video talking about the experiences with my mother, because it's very hard, you know, when a parent is dying on the other side, and they're seeing me as a heathen servant of Satan. And then we've had some really miraculous experiences doing energy work with her, and it changed her mindset about me in the end. So I'll share that at another time. But on the 1-year anniversary of her death, she came to me, and I channeled again. So it's not something that I seek out to do. It's just when spirit comes to me, and I know how to open myself up to that experience. So I've done it with paintings as well. My mother and I did a mandala together, and then I channeled the letter. And I actually channeled 3 letters from her in that 2nd year of her passing. And then I had a friend whose father had passed. I channeled a letter to her. And the last one that I did was my mother-in-law. She came through. And that was a really interesting experience, because she disowned me and hated me in the end of her life because I was not Mormon. And about 2 years after her death, she came through, and I was able to channel a letter to somebody she deeply loved. And that was a beautiful experience. So, yeah, I believe in talking with the dead, communing with the dead. I don't have a problem with that. I grew up in the Mormon church, and for me, the stories, you know, it's in my ancestry, it's in my history. Talking to spirits, talking to the dead, it was no big deal. Great uncle saw the devil, you know. I mean, it's weird, it's crazy, but that's Mormonism for you. It's some weird, crazy shit that the church has been built on. And I would say there are a lot of Mormons that have similar stories about talking to the dead loved ones. Maybe they don't channel it, maybe they don't write it down in automatic writing, but they do other things, you know, like patriarchal blessings. That's a channeled message that a man gets to channel. And, you know, Tim Ballard and all the mess that came about a couple of years ago with the trafficking, and it came out that, you know, the church uses psychics. It's not unheard of for the church to rely on someone who can see things or hear things, or you know, claircognizance, clairvoyance. Those are all gifts, and the church believes in those gifts. They believe in speaking in tongues. They believe in I mean, they wouldn't probably use the word necromancy, but I'm not afraid to. And I've made it very clear, I'm not Christian. I am pagan. I follow a very spiritual, shamanic path. And so it's interesting coming out of Mormonism to look back and see all the things that really are pagan about it. Yeah, the church wouldn't agree with that statement, but that's okay. I don't care what the church thinks at this point anymore. So yeah, that's my story about talking to the dead, working with the dead. And for my skull shirt for this one, because yeah, I guess, like to push the buttons a little bit of the what is acceptable and what is not. I think the hornet's nest should be poked a little bit. If that's what the church has said, if the church doesn't have the truth, it should be exposed. So I'm on that side. Let's expose the shit out of it. Let's call it what it is. Temples are for dead people. They're a little bit for the living, but you only go through once for yourself. You're going to go through over and over and over and over again for dead people. Talking to the dead, doing things for the dead. It's very, very Mormon. And if they want to enter the mainstream Christian mindset, they have to give up a lot more than just the name Mormon. Right. Till next time.